Mzansi Afrika molweni, welcome to the 10th episode of The Inside Track. Looking towards this year's local government elections, a conversation was sparked this weekend about where the DA stands on coalitions, the realignment of politics in South Africa, and how we can bring people together to build a new majority around shared values. We have John Steenhuisen in studio to define a way forward for the DA. And Helen Zille will weigh in with her considerable experience in managing coalition governments. We'll get stuck into all of this and more in this week's episode of The Inside Track. But first, we take a look at the week in headlines.
Well, lockdown level 1 regulations have been gazetted, but now allows for more freedom of movement and activities.
Port Elizabeth, Yearning and other parts of the Eastern Cape have hit the headlines this week after Sports, Arts and Culture Minister Natim Tatwa gazetted several name changes on Tuesday.
The class of 2020 matric results are out and many students will be looking at getting funding to further their studies. But the National Student Financial Aid Scheme will not be supporting first-year students for certain teaching and nursing university qualifications.
Spending on social grants is set to decrease by 6 billion rand this year, despite the number of beneficiaries expected to grow by 300,000.
What does this mean in terms of numbers? 11.1 million people in this country are out of work.
South Africa's response to the COVID-19 pandemic has been marred by claims of irregularities and corruption in terms of tenders. And now the health department is under the microscope. The Special Investigating Unit is probing a contract with a little-known communications company, Digital Vibes, and 2 long-term associates of the Health Minister, Dr. Zweli Mkhize, scored consultancy deals with the company.
The Constitutional Court will hear former President Jacob Zuma's state capture contempt case on the 25th of March, that is. Last month, the inquiry filed an application asking the court to jail Zuma for 2 years.
This week in the headlines, Port Elizabeth gets a new name, Gqeberha. Tito Mbowene's budget speech delivers the lowest blow to poor South Africans, and unemployment now stands at a shocking 42%. But first, for some good news. On Sunday evening, we had another family meeting, as the country likes to call it, with President Ramaphosa moving the country down to lockdown level 1. This means that all alcohol restrictions are lifted, limited gatherings are permitted, and the curfew has been shortened. Finally, we are starting to see us get some of our liberties back. However, it is critical that we are rapidly accelerating our vaccination program simultaneously. The vaccine is the only way out of this pandemic. And lockdowns simply cannot become South Africa's new load-shedding schedule, switching the economy on and off as we move between levels. Another big story was the release of the latest unemployment statistics, which showed that unemployment stood at over 42% for the fourth quarter of 2020. This is the highest that unemployment has been since we started tracking these figures back in 2008. More than 700,000 South Africans have lost their jobs between October and December last year. This means that almost half of our workforce is unable to find a job. These are not just mere statistics. These are the lives of families across the country. These are citizens who've lost their homes, children who go to bed hungry, and millions of women and men who have been stripped of their basic dignity. And so while the effects of COVID-19 pandemic and the subsequent lockdowns are partially to blame for this, we should not forget that the failed economic policies of the national government over the last decades have been the primary reasons why we find ourselves with such high unemployment levels. We must do everything in our power to roll back the job-destroying policies of the ANC. The lives of millions of citizens depend on it. And to make matters worse, for the first time in democratic history, the social grant budget is set to be cut. This is the lowest possible blow to millions of vulnerable South Africans. And if this is not enough, the price of transport and food is also set to increase, making this a double blow to the already stretched pockets of many people. This is particularly indefensible when you look at the immoral 30 billion rand bailout that has been granted to SAA. Poor South Africans should not have to bear the burden of paying for the ANC's corruption and mismanagement of our economy. This is an unacceptable trade-off for the most vulnerable members of our society. It seems the gravy train is stopping for nothing, not even a deadly pandemic. Last week, a report from Daily Maverick revealed shocking findings that a long-time personal associate of Health Minister Dr. Zille allegedly pocketed 82 million rand from COVID-19 funds. The company they direct was contracted to provide communication services. But get this. This company supposedly specializes in communications, has no website. The principal director doesn't seem to have any visible footprint in the communications industry. And now the department denies that there was any conflict of interest, but says that this is currently under investigation. But this is simply not good enough. Last week, we wrote to the President Ramaphosa, to institute an independent SIU investigation into these very serious allegations. We have seen far too many politicians use their influence to improperly award contracts, siphon public money, and not be held accountable for their crimes. Last week, many Eastern Cape residents woke up to learn of their new addresses. From Port Elizabeth to Gqeberha, from Maclear to Nqanqarhu, and King Williamstown to eQonce. Historically, the names of places do change over time and must change to redress historical injustices. We are certainly not arguing that name changes are not necessary. But, and here is the big but, in the middle of a pandemic, when we are scraping together the very last cents to buy vaccines, is this really what we should be spending money on? And then the Eastern Cape-run, ANC-run Eastern Cape government has the audacity to say that they can't put a price tag on transformation. Tell that to millions of South Africans who are without vaccines. Tell that to those who had lost loved ones during COVID-19 and those who are set to face a social grant cut. There was also no meaningful public participation on this instance. And so what happened to government by the people, for the people? Surely South Africans must have a say on what their government spends their money on. And lastly, we can all agree that South Africa is in dire need of nurses and teachers. Yet last week, the National Student Financial Aid Scheme announced that they will be defunding postgraduate studies in nursing and education. These are critical skills that South Africa desperately needs. Minister of Higher Education Blade Zamande has a lot to answer for this issue. In the spotlight this week, on Sunday, DA leader John Steenhuisen spoke in an interview on the need to realign politics in South Africa, bringing people together to build a new majority around shared values. Let's take a look at the story in the spotlight.
The future of South Africa lies with coalition politics.
We've seen how troublesome coalitions have been in places like Nelson Mandela Bay as well as Tshwane. So what should the country expect if this does happen? People on the ground, are people on the ground actually interested in a coalition? Are we going to be seeing ourselves entering into a coalition, or are we just speculative at this moment?
The Democratic Alliance leader John Steenhuisen gave an interview to the Sunday Times in which he also suggested there could be a major realignment of our politics.
We, of all the political parties in South Africa, have probably the most experience in managing coalitions. But at the heart of it, the Cape Town Coalition and all the other coalitions needed to be guided by principle.
That is why our values and policies are written for all South Africans. Because we know that a majority brought together by a shared set of values and principles and a shared vision for our country is the only foundation to build a solid future.
So it is about the reformers coming together from whatever parties they may be in to form that rational centre to be able to drive the reform agenda that South Africa needs to get onto a new trajectory of hope and prosperity.
A majority built around a single identity, a single culture, a single race can never, ever achieve this.
And And so joining me in studio today, I've got John Steenhuisen, the DA leader. Hello, John.
Hey, Siv. Great to be back with you and great to be with all of those who are watching at home.
And I've got Helen Zille, the Federal Council Chair. Hello, Helen.
Hi, Siv.
Good to have you. So we're going to just jump right in. John, on Sunday you gave an interview to the Sunday Times, and it sparked a lot of conversation about, South Africa and the future of coalition governments and realignment of politics. I want to just give you an opportunity to talk about what exactly was said in this interview, and to give that assurance to our viewers.
Sure, and I'm really grateful that we've started this debate in South Africa. I think it's long overdue. And with local government elections coming up later this year, I think these are the conversations we've got to start having about the future for South Africa. And so I'm really glad to be here with you today and to be with everyone at home. But to have these debates, we've got to have them in a format that actually understands what people are saying and doesn't misrepresent them. So at no stage in that interview did I say that we would enter into a coalition with the ANC as it stands today. I was asked whether we would work with them, and I said yes, we would work with them, but working does not necessarily mean a coalition. And I'm going to give some examples. We've already extended a hand of friendship in the House to the President around his reform agenda, and we've tabled a number of bills that give life to the President's reform agenda, and we've got to find a working majority to get them passed. We're going to have to work together across party lines if we're to succeed in getting rid of Siviwe Mkhwebane, the public protector. If we all just sit in our little voting blocks and we don't find a common ground on this, she's going to continue to be the public protector, and there will be long-term damage to both that office and South Africa. The third aspect where we're going to have to find each other is the new public service bill, about how we build a capable, independent public service and turn our back once and for all on cadre deployment. These are all opportunities for parties in the House who share the same values and principles to work together, and individuals within those parties to find each other.
And ultimately, John, I mean, I suppose what you are saying is that it doesn't necessarily mean that because you are sharing a vision on one particular issue that you are leaving your political parties, except that you are voting on something particular to move South Africa forward.
Well, of course. And I mean, I think that's what, the people who've either willfully or intentionally tried to misrepresent what was said are trying to say, well, does this mean the DA is going to collapse into the ANC? Absolutely not. What I did say very clearly, though, that the time is coming because our country is in a very, very difficult space. You've seen the unemployment figures that were there. The economy is not growing. Services are crumbling. Municipalities are falling apart. There has to come a time when the reformers and the rational centre come together to act in the best interests of South Africa. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean a coalition. It could mean a working arrangement around how we get majorities in places like Parliament. But the alternative, Siv, is what should terrify every South African. Because if the coalescence and the new majority is on the radical left, we're on a warp speed towards Zimbabwe, where you have a failed state, populist policies that destroy people's lives and destroy the country. We've got to stop that. And the only way we can stop that is by building a rational centre in South African politics that attracts people on shared values and principles who want to drive the reform agenda to get South Africa off this terrible low growth, high debt, high unemployment trajectory and onto a new trajectory of prosperity and hope for South Africans. That can only come by breaking the current logjam in South African politics and building that new majority. I want the DA to be the core of that new realignment in South Africa.
Yeah. Everybody has this question in their minds. Would we ever go into coalition with the ANC?
No, not in the current form of the ANC. And the primary focus that we all have to have in South Africa is to bring the ANC below 50%. We've got to get them out of power, to lose power so that that glue of patronage doesn't hold them together anymore, and it will give the reformers space to be able to strike out in a new direction. That is absolutely, and that is why our mission in this next local government election is to bring the ANC under 50% in as many municipalities as possible, so that we can start to open up that high stakes poker game about how we act in the best interests of this municipality, this town, this city, this province, and ultimately the country.
Yeah. And I want to bring you in here, Helen, because, I mean, you as the former leader of the DA, this has been something that you've been speaking about for a long time around the idea of realignment of politics, and you have experience of that. But talk to me about this idea around realignment. What does it mean? Because I think it's almost like a buzz term that people don't quite get.
So I've been talking about realignment of politics since 2008. It was in the run-up to the 2009 election, and I started talking then about how we had to realign politics. And you're quite right, people fundamentally misunderstood it. They thought it meant getting all the opposition parties together. And I said no, and it was that stage that I started thinking of how best to depict it. And how best to depict it came to me very strongly and very clearly after the 2014 election, when the EFF got a foothold for the very first time. And then it suddenly became crystal clear to me how to depict it. And after that, I often used to draw it for our colleagues. And if you don't mind me drawing it here,
please,
I used to draw it for our colleagues to explain how the realignment of politics needed to come about in South Africa to do what John says, to build the rational centre, the inclusive rational centre to take South Africa forward to become a success. And so what I did was I drew a triangle. Let me see if I can get this triangle drawn here, which I said represented the electorate. All the voters in South Africa are in that triangle. And just after that election, we had 22%. Now, what's 22%? I want to be a bit generous on the 22. Make that 22%. That's the DA. And the EFF had 6%. Put them over here. Probably been a little skint on the 6%, but nevertheless, that is the EFF and that is the DA. That's where we were then. And of course, this is the ANC. Here in the middle.
Yeah.
Right. Now, that is the electorate of South Africa, the DA. What the DA stands for is crystal clear. Constitutionalism, the rule of law, non-racialism, a market economy, the open opportunity society for all, crystal clear positioning, vision, strategy. The EFF is also crystal clear. Racial nationalist socialism, the party controlling the state controlling the economy, the party therefore controlling the economy through the state, cadre deployment, and all the rest of it. Radical socialism, as John mentions, those are the two crystal clear positions for South Africa's future. Now, the real contest, and I kept saying it, the real contest, if you want to talk about value sets and the choices between them, is between the EFF and the DA. And of course, over here in the DA, I don't want to paint them red, they might take offence, but there are other parties who would also put their weight behind the constitutionalism, the non-racialism, the rule of law, the market economy agenda. So that's us, right? But what's happening in the middle here? Could anybody explain what the ANC stood for? We knew what we stood for, the absolute radical alternative to the radical socialism of the EFF. We stood for the future as envisaged actually by our constitution. But could anyone tell us where the ANC stood? Not on any of these issues, because part of the ANC supports that, and there are individuals in the ANC that would support constitutionalism, the rule of law, non-racialism. They say it in their mantras all the time. Some of them actually believe it. So now, this party becomes an inchoate mess, and the critical thing is if politics is becoming a choice between principles and philosophies, then what you need is to make that choice clear. And the crisis the ANC is in is the process of getting that choice to be clearer. Now, if we want this side to ultimately win, we have to move the blue line in South Africa to get to this point, just past midpoint. That's our job. And I've been talking about this since 2008, not just adding the opposition parties up together, not at all. How do we get to the union buildings? And it's by pushing the line from here to there.
But what does that mean, Helen? I mean, what does that mean about pushing the line? I mean,
well, what
in
it
real
basically
terms.
means is the ANC's got to crumble.
Okay.
And the best way to get that to happen is to push the ANC below 50%. In local governments first, we started in local government in Cape Town, as you remember, because that is where you can actually have the best chance of pushing the ANC under 50%. So you push the ANC under 50%, the glue of patronage and contracts and tenders and everything melts, and then suddenly they have to choose between alternative positions and principles and values. And that is where you can get that clear choice happening. The radical departure for the DA was after 2016, when we tried to do working agreements with the EFF. Now, they were our polar opposites. And that should never have happened because it blurred that line. So the critical question is, it's this versus this. How do we make sure that the people in the ANC who support this EFF vision actually get there? And those who support broadly the vision of the DA find some way of working with us. That's what it means. And this is not going to be just one big party. These are going to be different parties that can come together on the same core value set to run workable coalitions, which are very, very difficult. So that's what we've been talking about forever. And this side of the triangle, if you want to give it an African place name, would be Botswana, I think, would be the closest. And this side is Zimbabwe.
Okay.
And that is the choice that South Africans face. And that's the choice the ANC faces. And our job is to put pressure on the ANC to enforce that people inside that organization make that choice.
All right. John, I want to come to you now. Helen has explained that this has obviously been something that has been in the works for many years. Now, there's been a conversation in South Africa where people want to know, is there a good ANC? Is there a bad ANC? Is the Cyril faction better than the Didi Mabuza faction? What's your view in light of the fact that we want to eat into the rational centre and be the voice in there?
Well, look, let me just say very clearly, I don't think that the binary that there is a good ANC and a bad ANC is accurate. There's one ANC, and they've caused huge damage to South Africa and its economy and to its people and to our economic prosperity and future. I do, however, believe there are reformers within the ANC. I think there are reformers in all parties, actually. And it's our job to seek out those reformers and bring them together around the growth agenda. Otherwise, we're going to continue with this terrible stalemate for South Africa. We're going to head towards a fiscal cliff. We're going to head towards greater poverty, growing unemployment. We've got to break the logjam. And we can only do that by the reformers finding each other from within their different parties to come together around that common agenda and to stand as that strong bulwark at the centre against the radical left ever getting into power. I mean, can you imagine Ace Magashule presidency, a Julius Malema deputy presidency? I think the prospects of that should terrify every freedom-loving South African. The alternative for that, the only alternative for that, is to build that rational centre. And I want to challenge supporters of other political parties to ask their leaders that when this high-stakes poker game happens, which side are you going to fall on? Are you going to fall on the radical economic transformation / EFF radical socialism side? Or are you going to side with the rational centre? And every voter should ask their political party leader where they see that happening, because that is the future scenario for South Africa. And I think that leaders now need to be talking about which side of this equation do they fall on. Do they want the Zimbabwe or do they want the Botswana?
Yeah.
You can't have both. You've got to choose which side you're going to be on.
And you can't muddy the waters constantly, where you're kind of just like in the middle here.
Well, I think it's very difficult. You can't say, maybe this, maybe that. This is, for me, it's a very clear choice. It's radical socialism with all of its fast-track, warp-speed policies that will take us to a Venezuela or a Zimbabwe, as Helen has spoken about, or the reform agenda, the growth agenda, the prosperity agenda that lies in a rational centre. And this is the only scenario possible in a proportional representation system. coalitions are going to have to be a thing of the future because of the way our political system is structured and defined. And that when no party gets a majority, you're going to have to make a values judgment on what is best for this town, this municipality, this province, the city, and as I said, ultimately the country. And you're going to have to make sure that you have a significant pile of chips on the table so that you can make sure that your values and principles form the core of that new majority.
Yeah. I want to talk about 2021 actually, and before I come to Helen, about actually our history of coalitions. I mean, a lot of people might say, well, I mean, if you are saying, you know, that the coalitions are the future and whatnot, then are you going into this election with the notion that you are not going to win? I mean, do you not have, you know, confidence in your own offer that people are going to get behind you?
Absolutely, absolute confidence in our offer. And that is why our first priority is to win outright as many municipalities as possible. And I've been on the show in the last little while talking about Nelson Mandela Bay. We've got to win an outright majority there. If we can win an outright majority there, it gives us a freer hand to govern. But where we don't, we've then got to, as I say, make that judgment call on a case-by-case basis on what is best in that particular scenario to make sure that the citizens get the best possible government and deal out of that arrangement, because those are the people who are often forgotten in these high stakes games. They, you know, decisions are made on which position I can get, or you know, which office I can have. The real choice is that, do we have the values and principles in common? Can we get something to work in service of the residents and citizens who we are supposed to serve? And if so, what would that look like? And that's what's got to be what's used as the litmus test for whether you actually form something, or, and I've been very clear about this, if we cannot get something together around the values and principles, we will take our seats on the opposition benches and be the best opposition that could possibly be in that particular situation.
Yeah. Helen, we've got history of, a long history actually. A lot of people might think that we first did coalitions in 2016, but we've got a long history of managing difficult coalitions. You started this in the city of Cape Town. Tell us about that.
Well, the city of Cape Town was a very complex and difficult coalition because the ANC had just under 39% of the vote and the DA had 42% of the vote. Now, that shows you exactly the kind of scenario. You pull the ANC under 50%, because the ANC was in government before in Cape Town. You pull them under 50%, and they are looking around for coalition partners to push them up, and that puts you in a very, very strong position. Now, because the ID under Patricia de Lille at that time went with the ANC, we were level pegging, and the PAC had the casting vote. So we put together a 7-party coalition, a very complex and disparate one, but what made it work was that the DA had 42%. We were the strong anchor tenant, and therefore we could hold it together, and we could make it worth the other tiny parties' while to stay in with us, because we were offering this clear alternative to the radical economic transformation lobby. So much so that eventually Patricia came along and brought her ID into the DA. So it was a strong anchor tenant that enabled us to use that coalition to build a much bigger base and to govern successfully. And that was so important. And then, of course, in 2009, we won an overall majority in the Western Cape on the strength of the Cape Town coalition. Now, this is critical to understand, because people saw that we'd governed well in Cape Town and they wanted the same for the Western Cape as a whole, and they looked to the anchor tenant to achieve that. And that's what we were able to do. Now, managing coalitions is enormously difficult. And some smaller parties are highly principled, others are not. No names, no pactoral. But, you know, if you can't get a vision and an action plan and get everybody behind it, your coalition's going to fall apart. And most importantly, there's got to be one strong, principled party with a capacity, with a vision, with the policies, with a plan that can lead it.
And I mean, John, looking at this, Helen mentioned something quite important, that sometimes your foothold into governing somewhere is to form a coalition so that you can show what you can do, and then you can probably win an outright majority.
That's the other point I made, is that unless you're in politics to get into power, to bring those policies, plans and principles to bear and to change people's lives, you're not really a political party. Then you're just a lobby group or a pressure group or an NGO. The whole point of politics is to get into power and to have access to that power so that you can change things for the better. And so I'm absolutely committed to the DA getting into the union buildings so that we can make sure we establish that foothold and are able to show South Africans that there is another way to do things. We don't have to be trapped in this terrible situation that we find ourselves in. And leaders of other political parties as well need to show if building a new majority at the centre is not the solution, then what is their path to power? Or do they intend to just remain small opposition parties for the rest of their life where you can never really make a difference? We've only been able to get in and demonstrate the DA difference in places like Cape Town, Nelson Mandela Bay, Tshwane, Midvaal, all these municipalities we govern, and most importantly, the province of the Western Cape, because we were able to get into power, into the driving seat, to show and demonstrate that difference. And that today is the DA's most compelling vote driver, the fact that where we govern better. We want to do that for South Africa as well. And that is why I'm passionately committed to building this new majority, to providing a roadblock to radical economic socialism and the radical economic transformation faction. Because if they get into the driving seat and we're pushed into the periphery and the rational centre falls apart, it is open season for them. And then I really do fear for what the future for South Africa would hold.
Yeah, and I want to put this to both of you. Often people see politics as essentially being a contest between political parties, and of course it is. But there comes a time of crisis, in my view, like where South Africa finds itself in at the crossroads, where you've got to have people who have the common view, who have at least a common goal of getting us out of this crisis. Is that something that we are looking to do, considering the fact that the leadership is needed by the people of South Africa at the moment?
Absolutely. And I think there's never been a more opportune time for South Africans who share values and principles and who care about the future and want to put the country first to come together and unite at that rational centre in politics, precisely to ensure that we can lift people out of poverty, create more opportunity, create jobs, get an economy going, get foreign direct investment flowing back into South Africa, get an education system reformed properly, make sure we've got a capable civil service, make sure that we've got a judiciary that is absolutely impartial and respects the rule of law, ensuring that the principles of the Constitution are upheld. That is a fight that's worth having for South Africa, and it is the fight that's going to define whether we end up as another failed state or whether we end up fulfilling our promise of being the real lighthouse in Africa for prosperity, growth, and opportunity.
So, Helen, what are South Africans yearning for? I can only imagine 42% unemployment rates, crime levels, corruption, and South Africans are saying, where to from now?
Well, what South Africans are yearning for is to be able to live a life they value with their families, with their children if they choose to have them, with the people they love, to have jobs, to be able to care for themselves and not be dependent on the state, and to be able to do meaningful work. And that surely is not too much to ask. And we have seen in countries that free people up to give them opportunities and to create conditions for an economy to flourish, that millions of people have been taken out of poverty and given the freedom. And that combination, not just taken out of poverty under a dictatorial state, but taken out of poverty in free societies, that has been the biggest transformation of millennia. And that is what we want for South Africa, and that's what people want for themselves.
Now, John, we're heading towards, it's unclear at the moment as to when the local government elections are going to be. We headed towards them nonetheless, as we probably later on this year. What is going to be the DA's 3-point plan going from now to then? in order to be able to reinvigorate and reignite our support where we've had support before, but also in terms of eating into this centre?
Well, you've seen already what we've started to do in terms of tabling the reform agenda in Parliament. We've said, well, the President has got no room to move in his own party because of the strength that the radical economic transformation faction has within his party. And if you doubt that strength, you only need to see what's happened this week with Ace Magashule, who's now completely sidestepped the step aside thing and has now been put in charge of the process. Very clearly, the President's got very little room to move within his own party. So we've tabled the reform agenda. And we're going to do that across the country. We can't wait for the ANC to sort their problems out. We've got to get cracking on these reforms. We also believe it's going to now become obvious about who supports the growth agenda and who doesn't support the growth agenda. Then at a local level, making sure that we liberate as many towns and cities from the misery, poverty and crumbling services that they're currently experiencing under failed governments, making sure we vote those governments out, bring those governing parties under 50% and start to effect change there. And then we drive the campaign on local issues. We'll have a national campaign message, but every town has got its own issues, it's got its own problems, it's got its own unique challenges. And we want to be able to field candidates who know how to serve the community properly, and we're going to run campaigns that show how we're going to fix it. I think South Africans are tired of having a light shone showing how deep the hole is. What South Africans are looking for is a party that's got the plans to show the light, to show the way out of the crisis that they're in. And if we can show people how we can get them from a zinc and iron shack into a home in a safe neighborhood with clean running water, electricity, safe transport routes to them to be able to access education and work opportunities, how they can have a municipality that works for them, not them working for the municipality, then I think we're going to be able to go in with a really compelling offer in the local government elections.
Cool. And Helen, are we ready to go and campaign? A lot of people have been asking this question.
We absolutely are. We haven't stopped for 1 minute, but we've just moved all our systems onto digital platforms. It's been one of the big transformations that has happened inside the DA silently, but it has been a silent, disruptive moment, a kind of revolution that we've weathered very, very well. And now we have bigger town hall meetings than we used to have in person. We have them digitally now. And so it's really great. We can get people in the comfort of their own homes to tune into a meeting addressed by our leader, John, and really get people into the campaign. This is another innovation of the lockdown period, this direct broadcast. So we've done many, many things that harness technology to help us get our message directly across so that it doesn't have to be mediated.
Thank you. Right, thank you very much. Thank you, John, and thank you, Helen, and thank you for joining me. And I look forward to being part of this election campaign. It's going to be different, but I suppose it's going to be exciting.
It's going to be lit, as they say.
It's going to be lit.
Right, now let's move on to the DA at Work feature. This week in DA-led towns and cities across the country, more than 300 jobs to be created in DA-led Kucha affordable housing project. An 11 million rand boost for the Gwarube sports field upgrade from DA-led NMB. And the DA-led City of Cape Town CCTV network has led to successful arrests of 160 suspects since July. But onto this week's feature. This week, we are featuring DA Councillor Angus Mackenzie, who was elected a ward councillor for Bonteheuwel in 2014. Councillor Mackenzie pioneered a groundbreaking program of law enforcement advancement plan, which sought to place more boots on the ground in order to combat crime and gangsterism in his area. This was to augment and supplement the work that was done by SAPS, which was woefully inadequate against this scourge. The tremendous success of this LEAD program has fundamentally changed this community and is now set to be replicated across the province. And so now we hear more from him. Hello, Angus, and thank you for joining us.
Good morning, Siviwe. Good morning, John, and to all the viewers out there. Thank you.
Perfect. So you were elected as a ward councillor. Tell us a little bit more about what you found in Bonteheuwel when you first got elected.
So I was actually elected in 2016. So
okay.
I was elected in 2016. We won with an overwhelming majority in the area. There's very, very strong support base for the Democratic Alliance in the area. But I think most critically what we found was that there was a community that was alive with possibilities. It's smack bang in the center of the city, so it's easy, accessible routes into the city. Outside, we had public transport interchanges, but the social inequalities within the area was probably some of our biggest challenges, which led to poverty and then the ongoing gang violence situation. And so on a daily basis, we would be receiving complaints from mothers and families saying that their children can't go to school because of gang violence. They're not able to go to work because of gang violence. And on a daily basis, our phones would not stop ringing of yet another person has been shot. And so even though we had the situation, it became extremely important as a leader in that community. How do you show that you care? But in showing that you care, how do you fix the problem? Because what effectively led to the solution to the problem has changed the community completely. So we've seen a consistent increase in our matric pass results rate in the community over the last few years, and it's gone from 58% to 68% to 75%, which we currently are now. One really, really successful number that's come out of this change in the community is that 12,000 children started grade 1 in that community 12 years ago. We had a retention rate, unfortunately, 4 years ago of 0.0012% of kids ended up in matric 12 years later. That number's changed considerably now. So we're seeing more children staying at school, finishing their education, giving themselves a better option and chance in life. So while the LEAP program has generally assisted from a crime prevention and suppressing of gang violence in the situation, the ripple effects of that LEAP program, the fact that a party has shown that we care, has been able to transform that community in many, many other avenues as well.
That's incredible. I mean, just to show that, if you're fighting a scourge of gangsterism and crime, it doesn't just affect the crime levels, but it just affects the entire community. And so, I mean, why were the residents feeling like they could not rely on the SAPS at the time?
I think there are various challenges with the South African Police Service, and I think we need to highlight the fact that the South African Police Services, which is controlled nationally by the ANC government in effect, has really let down the local police officer on the ground. I think we need to make that clear. There are some really hard-working local police officers, but with the lack of resources, with the lack of numbers, with the fact that they just are unable to get to crime scenes because the vehicles aren't working, or they don't even have bulletproof vests to be able to protect themselves, let alone the community, it's really placed these officers at a very difficult position. And so what effectively happened in Bonteheuwel is you have a community of 85,000 people, of which you have 2 SAPS vans per shift patrolling 85,000 people. Sure. So those numbers are completely skewed. And so while the United Nations tells us we need 1 policeman to every 280 odd people, in Bonteheuwel you had a situation where you had 1 policeman to every 25 to 30,000 people, which is completely ludicrous and completely unheard of. And so when police don't respond to people, that breaks down that level of trust. When they do respond and they arrest someone, and within 12 hours, the community who gave the tip-off of that individual sees that same individual walking the streets again, it completely destroys the morale of that community. So what became critical was how do you rebuild trust in this community with this law enforcement team, with this LEAP advancement program. And I've always maintained since the start of it that more police don't overcome crime.
Yeah.
Building relationships with communities overcomes crime. Because crime is not just about a gangster's willingness to shoot someone else. There is a reason why that gangster is attempting to shoot someone else, because there's a fundamental breakdown that needs to be resolved. And so for me, it's always been, and we've seen the success of it, we need to be able to build relationships. We need to build bridges, and we need to create a situation where communities are once again trusting law enforcement and the response of law enforcement to the situations that we face.
So, but then you introduced this program, this initiative in your neighborhood.
Yeah.
And so how did you set it up, and sort of what were the key tenets of it?
So obviously our SAP's response was little to nothing.
Yes.
We then were allocated 100 law enforcement officers in the area, and Bonteheuwel strategically is quite an easy area to navigate. And so we very simply drew a diagram. We blocked Bonteheuwel into 4 quadrants, and we said that we're placing 25 officers into each quadrant. And we don't want to see officers in cars. We want to see officers walking the street. We want to see officers talking to community members. We want to see officers interacting with children. We want to see them build this relationship. That was good, and that started the healing process for relationships. What we then did was we still needed information. We still needed communities to give us information. So we've seen the sad situations of all these shootings, and it really, without information, we can't really fight crime. And so we needed to find a way that communities would give us information, and because of their previous experience with SAPs, they wouldn't give us information. And so I became that person that the Bonteheuwel people gave information to. I was their trusted ward councillor. I was the man that they voted for and they trusted. And my personal phone number became their tip-off service. And we'd receive hundreds of tip-offs every day that this is about to happen, this gangster's doing this, this is what's happening here. And what we were able to do is take that information immediately, because unfortunately I hardly sleep, but we were able to take that information immediately, pass it on to a secured WhatsApp group, which had these law enforcement officials on it. And within 3 minutes of the resident giving us a tip-off, you would find a van at that area, at that point. And so that built confidence within people, because the person that's giving the tip-off knows that 3 minutes ago she sent this to the councillor, and 3 minutes later, there is a van outside the house. And so she tells the neighbour. And the neighbour tells the next neighbour, and the response becomes quicker, and the visibility becomes higher. And over this period, you just start seeing more people regaining the trust in these officers. And I think one key thing on this topic, and I've constantly patrolled with them. I've even got into trouble patrolling with these officers, but I just enjoy it so much. We would come across young children, whether they've had a small knife on them or a little bit of drugs. And so the question goes, so ideally this child should be arrested and he should be put through the system. But does that benefit that child? Is it not more important for us to understand where this child comes from? What home does this child come from? What's happening in this child's home environment? Why is the child not in school? So we were able to take this LEAP program, match it up with social development to show that it's not just about hard knocking down of gangsterism and crime, but how do we help so that that child actually becomes a meaningful person within the community as well, instead of sending him through the system. And so we brought social development on board, and we have an active social development team that are now constantly working in partnership with myself and these officers in trying to turn around that community.
And this is incredible stuff. So we sent a crew to Bonteheuwel this week to go and chat to some residents about this program and how they've experienced it and how it's changed their lives. Let's take a look.
Before the LEAP program started and before the law enforcement officers were deployed to Bonteheuwel, we had exceptionally high crime, as with the rest of the Cape Flats, because Bonteheuwel is situated on the Cape Flats.
We were infected and inflicted with gang violence.
You can't walk in the street, because if they shoot, you're going to get caught in the fire, because, you know, it's bullets flying everywhere.
When gunshots ring out, the first thing that comes to my mind is get onto the floor. You never know when these bullets actually come through your home.
Our kids couldn't even play in peace in the park. I was actually very scared even to leave my home. Constantly, I will say constantly living in fear.
My kid was robbed by gunpoint of an Apple iPhone. My husband was gun-pointed thrice with his work bag and things taken from him.
At night, gangsters used to run over our rooftops.
I heard all these gunshots, I think something like 10 of them. And I couldn't leave for work that morning because there was a dead body lying in front of our gate. And as I looked up from the one, I noticed another one just across the road.
As we get on our corner, we have to look left, right, and center because of the gang violence.
I was almost shot at. I had to reverse in Bonteheuwel Avenue from Dr. de Villiers all the way down to Bonteheuwel Avenue because they were shooting in S and T block.
It upset everyone. Children were traumatized. People were traumatized. I was traumatized. And it just affects our normal way of life.
That is how bad it was here. But since the law enforcement moved in and since LEAP is here in Bonteheuwel, we have seen, please don't get this wrong, Bonteheuwel still has issues. But the positivity and the difference in the people, you can immediately see.
You go out, you see the people jogging, old people walking in the street. So comfortable they feel with the policing around them. Constantly they patrolling our streets, so that makes you feel more at ease.
Before we had this program, there were days when I dreaded even getting up. But afterwards, I felt safe because, I could be walking down the street or crossing the road or down Bonteheuwel Avenue, and I would see 5 law enforcement vehicles in that time just passing me by, which made me feel safer.
Thanks to our ward councillor, who's very, very active in the community. We can phone him late at night, in the middle of the night, and he's always there and he's always available to help.
Look where we're standing today. We're standing here. We walked all the way from the center. We weren't robbed. We weren't accosted. Nothing happened to us. Here's young people out. Here's old people out. Joggers passed us. All of that. None of this would have been possible if it hadn't to be for LEAP and the law enforcement officers.
I would say our councillor fight for all that things, to make Bonteheuwel safer for the community.
John, I want to come to you. I mean, that is an incredible endorsement, not just of, the local leader, but also just of the ingenuity of people who live. You've always literally spoken about what the value is of local leadership, of going to communities and responding to their localized needs. And I mean, what do you have to say when you look at that and you see the difference that this kind of work is making in people's lives?
Well, first of all, very proud. I mean, to be able to lead a party with councillors with the quality of people like Angus, and I'm happy to say he's my mom's favourite councillor in the whole of the DA, so he comes with a big badge of honour. I think she's one of his biggest followers. To have a quality public representative who's there not for the salary, not for the position, but because he wants to serve, or he or she wants to serve the community. And you can see that servant leadership makes a big difference. Secondly, to have a city council that is responsive. And I think Angus touched on a very important point that a lot of people forget. The SAPS is not run by the provincial government. Yeah. We want it to be run by the provincial government. We want policing powers to be devolved to a local and provincial level because it will then give greater powers to be able to really tackle crime. But it is run nationally, and that is a challenge. Now, you can do one of two things. You can throw your arms up and say, well, it's national government's responsibility, or you can do what we've done in the city of Cape Town and get stuck in as a city to try and fill that gap. And projects like this are only possible because you've got excellent public representatives who understand the need of their community. You've got a community that's willing to work with the councillor and the local municipality, and you've got a responsive government that is willing to get stuck in and deal with it. And that can only happen when you've got a DA government.
Absolutely. And I mean, now to this point, John, I mean, the province is now looking to replicate this model. So again, looking at what works and what's excellent and then spreading it across.
Absolutely. And I mean, this is exactly the type of innovation that we want to bring not only to Bonteheuwel, to Cape Town, to the Western Cape. We want to bring it to South Africa, to show people that you don't have to live in fear of gangsters and criminals, that we can turn the tide against crime, but it requires the commitment and resources to do so. And that can only come when you've got a government that's prioritizing the people's needs rather than prioritizing who's getting what tender and how they can make themselves or their families rich.
Angus, I mean, again, this is a massive endorsement, not just for the program, but for the people who you lead in your community, and just to seeing the difference that it makes. And I mean, how do you feel that now even the province is looking to replicate this?
Look, I think at the end of the day, it's about that people. It's about changing people's lives and giving people better opportunities in life. Over the last few weeks, I've looked at house prices in my community. And the interesting thing was that 5-6 years ago, a 2-bedroom house would sell for something like 380,000 rand. 3-bedroom homes are going for nothing short of 800,000 rand in my area today. What does that tell me? It tells me that property owners are investing in the community. People want to live in a community that's safer. People want to live in a community where there are opportunities for people. And more so importantly is creating spaces and places that people can thrive. My only wish is that we are able to not only replicate this in Bonteheuwel, but across the country. Yeah. And for people to not just view it as a Bonteheuwel project, but for people to view it as a project of a administration and a party, a DA party, that actually cares about people. We're not going to get everything right all the time, but the things that matter to communities, understanding those local issues on the ground and fixing local issues has a ripple effect that changes people's lives completely. And I think that's the most important thing, and really just about servant leadership and seeing people understanding your passion, people understanding your love, and being led by that love and passion to be able to replicate the change within their homes, into their children's lives, to see better people being born and nurtured through these communities.
Yeah. And I mean, just this weekend, we've learnt of a number of teenagers who were shot in the Mitchells Plain area, some of whom were injured. And ultimately, this is a grave injustice, and no family should live in this kind of fear. And so we really thank you, Angus, for the work that you are doing in your community. And then we are quite excited that we're going to be blowing this up across the province. And again, it speaks to your point, John, about the fact that people must lend us their vote so we can do what we can to be able to bring the day difference where they live. Yeah. And we will be back after this. Africa. Local government elections are coming up later this year. And as we've heard from John and Helen in today's show, it is absolutely crucial that every South African who values democracy acts to preserve the rational centre at this very precarious time. Check your voter registration status at check.da.org.za and make sure that come election day, you are ready to play your part. Until next week, keep it tight, Mzansi.